Hello and welcome to you all on behalf of Kashmir Institute of to this webinar. This is a parallel event on the sidelines of the 45th session of UN Human Rights Council. Due to COVID-19, we could not do it in person in the UN. Today we will discuss demographic change, violation of international law, a case study of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. As you all know, the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, India began with settler colonial project soon after the occupation of the Kashmir, but initially in order to tame its local collaborators and to confuse the international community, they failed to get away with their forced claim about the instrument of accession. A certain amount of autonomy was granted to the state through Article 370, and state subject laws were retained by Article 35A of the Indian Constitution through a presidential order. From its inception, autonomous states of the state had remained a thorn in the flesh for the government of India, and attempts were made by different administrations to cause inroads into the autonomy of the state. The most significant of them was the presidential order of 1954, and hereafter, from 1950 to 2019, 47 presidential orders on the state of Jammu and Kashmir have been passed, and these orders in effect enable Parliament of India to make laws for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and out of 97 subjects, on the 94 subjects, Indian Parliament was already making laws. Have claimed that Article 370, rather than providing any protection to the states into the autonomy of the state. Despite all these erosions and modifications made in the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, there were some laws, Indian laws, which were not applicable to the state, and also state had some special laws not found in the books of the Indian Constitution. It also had a symbolic and sentimental value for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The Article 370 and 35A of Constitution protects the rights and privileges of the permanent residents of states, which stands abolished by the Reorganization Act of 5th August 2019. In furtherance of the Reorganization Act, Government of India passed a domicile law, which in effect gives agency rights and privileges to non-state subjects by showing a bare minimum stay or education in Kashmir. So this act, these actions of the Government of India was in order to complete its settler colonial project in Indian occupied Kashmir. Since then, a series of steps have been announced and executed by the Government of India to change the demography of the state. The constitutional international experts, international law experts describe this action as in contravention of international law and Geneva Conventions and constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Today we will discuss this in length and will learn from our experts about this and reparation available for the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir in international law. And we have a very learned panel. We have with us Paul Bristow, is Member of Parliament of UK and Deputy Leader of the Conservatives Friends of Kashmir, the group which is constituted in the Parliament. Sarah Owen, also Member of Parliament and a friend of Kashmir, also always there for the people of Kashmir, raising voice for them. We have with us Mr. Ahmed Qureshi, is a TV commentator, a journalist, and also the Executive Director of Youth Forum for Kashmir. We have with us Ali Reza Saeed, a well-known name for the Kashmir in the European Parliament. He is chair of the EU Kashmir Committee. And we have with us Shaista Safi, a young activist from Kashmir. She has recently moved to UK and has become a prominent name in the advocacy for Kashmir in the UK. We will be shortly joined by the APHC leader, Maulana Masroor Abbas Ansari. He is the chair of Ittihad al-Muslimin and an executive member of All Parties Hurriyat Conference, and a son of a great warrior, Maulana Abbas Ansari. And also, we will be joined by Sayyid Faiz Naqshbandi from All Parties Hurriyat Conference. To begin with, I would like Paul Brestow for his deliberations and what the conservatives are thinking and what he is thinking about this Indian annexation and the way India has taken and what are the reparations available for the people of Kashmir, how to move ahead. Paul, you have the floor, and please unmute your video also.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be able to speak to all of you here today. That introduction was very informative and something that, unfortunately, a lot of us are all going to be all too familiar with. What Article 370 and Article 35A did was give the people of Kashmir, as you quite rightly said, some sort of autonomy and protection from rules around settlement. And it's quite clear to me and to many others who are interested in that region that the revocation of these rules are about changing the demographics of the area and obviously changing any result of any possible future democratic settlement in that area. And as you rightly said, that this is something which goes against laws on humanity and concern to not just some of the awful things that go on in that part of the world, knowing that we have so many Kashmiris who are involved in business, in politics, in all sorts of different ways of life in my city. And my job as the Conservative MP for Peterborough is not just about obviously representing the interest of my constituents in Parliament, but it's also making sure that the things that they're concerned about get wider recognition. And what's going on in Kashmir and Jammu, in Indian occupied Kashmir and Jammu, is obviously a significant part of that. My party, the Conservative Party, I think, are on a bit of a journey. And I don't want to make this party political because my friend Sarah Owen, who's a Labour MP, I know is also on the panel, and she will share many of the things that I will share the views of many of the things that I've just said. But traditionally, my party, the Conservative Party, perhaps has seen this as very much a bipartisan issue between Pakistan and India. And I think that's probably the view, also the official opposition now. But I think with the election of quite a few MPs of my party in areas at the last election with large Kashmiri diaspora, there is a growing awareness amongst my colleagues on my side and with the Labour Party that this is no longer an issue that can be ignored. This has been a forgotten conflict for many, many, many years, and that just cannot continue. And I think part of how we make the case is, yes, we talk about the human rights violations, yes, we talk about the awful things that go on in Kashmir each and every day, but we need to make a political argument too. And the argument that I always talk about is, how can this be a bipartisan issue between India and Pakistan and leave out the most important people of all? And that's the people there on the ground in Kashmir and Jammu. Britain would never discuss sovereignty over, say we say Gibraltar or the Falkland Islands or many of our overseas territories, and consider, for example, Gibraltar an issue only between the United Kingdom and Spain, or consider the Falkland Islands only an issue between Argentina and the United Kingdom. We would always take into account the views of the people of that overseas territory, and the people of Kashmir deserve no less. So my job and the jobs of my colleagues is to persuade the British government and the front bench of the Labour Party to see this similarly as a tripartite issue, and that the views of the people of Kashmir and Jammu deserve equal respect, equal respect to those of the Pakistani government and the Indian government. And I think there's a real opportunity now in this country to try and make that case. I think the Kashmiri diaspora in this country are more politically organised and motivated than ever before. And you will find myself, and I'm sure in the case of Sarah, a very eager and willing audience, not just to listen, but to be an activist and make sure that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are heard loud and clear.
Thank you, Paul. Ending with an encouraging note that people of Kashmir should be heard loud and very clear, and that this is not an issue between India and Pakistan. Most importantly, the people of Kashmir, who are the main party to the dispute, they should be heard as in the other parts of the world. We have been joined by Sayyid Faiz Naqshbandi, who is convener of All Parties Hurriyat Conference. Sayyid Faiz Naqshbandi is a lawyer, is a constitutional expert. So I will refer directly to the Sayyid Faiz Naqshbandi for his contribution. Mr. Naqshbandi, you have the floor. Do you hear me? Mr. Naqshbandi?
Unmute yourself, Naqshbandi sir.
Mr. Naqshbandi? Please not perhaps Naqshbandi. Yes. Faiz साहब शुरू करें.
He's muted.
He's muted. Faiz साहब, unmute yourself and start. You have the floor.
When sab 8 minutes cut the base floor, it's called be adjustment. But what was just now?
Okay.
Just now. Okay.
Sayyid Faiz is perhaps just settling his things down. So I would like to request Mr. Ahmed Qureshi for your contribution. Mr. Qureshi, please. Qureshi?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wani. Thank you very much, and very honored to join you and this very distinguished panel. I'll just be very quick. I would like to highlight just a couple of points, and the first is that on Kashmir conflict, we are seeing a shift in international perceptions of two key parties to this conflict. One is India and the other one is the Kashmiris themselves. So on India, I think it's quite discernible post 2016 that there is a change and a shift in the language of the international mainstream media and also the United Nations with regards to India's role in Kashmir conflict. And why is this important? It's important because over the past 6 or 7 decades, India was quite successful in, let's say, deferring or postponing any discussion on Kashmir conflict resolution on the basis of the fact that India has another role in the international arena, which attracted quite a bit of interest, and also I might add admiration, which is India's role as a role model for emerging or developing countries. So India was quite successful in marketing that side of its role internationally over the past half century, quite successfully. And it was indeed looked upon as a role model for developing nations. And that role, and India's status as an emerging market as well, somehow superseded any discussion on India's role in this conflict, Kashmir conflict. Now, there's a shift and there's a change now post-2016, specifically July 2016, after the extrajudicial execution of a young Kashmiri social media activist who's, according to the Indian government, was a militant, but he was mainly a youth activist and a social media activist, Burhan Wani, in July 2016. And post that, of course, we saw the United Nations and its half century of silence on Kashmir almost. The last time the UN really discussed Kashmir conflict was in 1970 and 1971. And after a long break, we saw in September 2016, the UN break its silence. And we saw Kashmir edging back to the international media, into the international media, and the coverage of the developments within Kashmir increased gradually in the years 2017, 18, 19, and now 20. And of course, it was a tremendous shift and increase in the way Kashmir was covered internationally post India's decision to annex Kashmir in August 2019. So there's a changed international environment now. It's no longer a taboo to discuss India's role. And I recall a time before, I'd say 2017 or 2016, where you could not really discuss very openly, and might I add critically, India's role in Kashmir, discussed critically before 2016, and you can do that now. And we see that happening in international media outlets. Certainly in Britain, we see it in the United States and newspapers, which is in the Japanese language. And there are reasons, Japan being very close to India because of issues related to China and the containment of China and that issue in Asia Pacific. So Japan would never really even, be caught anywhere, near the word Kashmir. And you see Kashmir now being discussed also in the Japanese media. So there's a shift. The point is there's a shift in international media's perceptions on India, on Kashmir. Kashmir is being discussed, plenty of articles. I might even dare say the international media is discussing Kashmir and analyzing it, I would say, much more deeply and much more thoroughly than even the Pakistani media, which at one point in time used to be the only place where you could find really the media discussing Kashmir. There wouldn't be any discussion on Kashmir in the media, mainstream media, anywhere in the world, probably with the exception of maybe a couple of papers in India. And normally you'd find that discussion in Pakistan. But it's changed now. So you have that shift. So that needs to be recognized. And the second thing is that Kashmir is now firmly part of the international agenda, mainly thanks to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the previous High Commissioner and the current. Both of them firmly have placed Kashmir on the international humanitarian agenda, thanks to Kashmir's inclusion in the periodic statements or humanitarian updates by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights at the start of each session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. So you find Kashmir now and updates on Kashmir right there in the middle with other urgent international humanitarian situations, such as in Syria and other places worldwide. So Kashmir is there firmly, and this situation has persisted since September 2016, 17, 18, 19, and now 20. And just earlier this month, the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva again spoke on Kashmir in detail. So we have Kashmir now established as part of an international agenda, and we have this shift in international perceptions on India and Kashmir. So now the question is, and where I will end my intervention here, is the question here is how to nudge or how to use this changing international environment for the first time in half a century on Kashmir, how to use it to really move toward conflict resolution. And that's the challenge. And of course, when you discuss that, the main question that really needs to be asked is how to nudge India really toward conflict resolution, because India is the bigger party to this in this conflict, and it is the party that has the political space, the strategic space to really move forward and offer options and make the necessary adjustments, really, so that the other parties to this conflict, the government of Pakistan and the Kashmiris, can also get on board and then move toward a conflict resolution. So the main obstacle really right now is, and of course we've seen discussion over Kashmir in the British Parliament. We've seen it at the UN Human Rights Council. We've seen it in U.S. Congress. We've seen a couple of hearings in the past 12 months in U.S. Congress in Kashmir. We have for the first time an American president. People like him, hate him, but at least he's offered mediation, which is not enough by any standard, but at least he's established that this is a disputed conflict and veered off or away from the stated Indian position of Kashmir being an internal matter of India and thus should not be discussed really at any platform internationally. So we have these little things that have happened over the past 5 years, major change. So the big question is how to nudge India, and this is the huge challenge for human rights defenders, for people who are working on Kashmir conflict. We are talking about the humanitarian situation in Kashmir. We know what's going on, what needs to be done. The world's longest lockdown in Kashmir. All that has been established now. There's tremendous material available, and I think the 2 UN human rights reports, the 2 reports issued by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN, they've included things and issues and cases and references in those 2 reports. There are issues and cases in those reports that go back with details and with the evidences, and so you have everything. The chips are in place. So how to move forward, and that's the question, of course, for which I don't have an answer. How to nudge a country like India, which is a large country, is a big country, has its own network of complex international relations and relationships, and it's a very important, and it lies at a very important place strategically, with China on one side, the Asia Pacific region, and it is a huge market. And I'm not really hung up on the issue of India's importance in terms of trade, because I don't think that is really a hindrance. Usually we see, and I'm doing a bit of self-criticism here, a lot of us Kashmir activists, and even when we're talking to some government officials here in Islamabad, often the excuse that is offered for not doing more really to move forward diplomatically is that India is a huge market and there's just somehow no way to get the world to really do something on Kashmir because of the trade interests. And I think despite those trade interests, we've seen news organizations like the BBC and the CNN in the past 12 months, post August 5, 2019, do very critical journalism on Kashmir and on India's role and Indian military's role inside Kashmir, and the fact that Indian government is one of the biggest advertisers on these 2 international media outlets, for tourism promotions and so forth. That did not prevent these media outlets to really talk about this, and also we've seen. And there are many other examples. So basically, I think the 2 things that I will conclude my intervention with. One is that I think it is time for us to think, in order to nudge India to really get closer to move on to conflict resolution, we need to somehow find some ways and creative ways to get Kashmiris on board. And I often think back to how the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was sort of brought and was given a chair on the table back in the 1970s. And that was the beginning of really getting the Palestinians to become part of the debate and discussion in the Middle East peace process. And one of the ways to do that was to give a platform and recognize a Kashmiri group to become some sort of a representative for Kashmiri people. And then that group could probably represent Kashmiris, because you need to organize Kashmiri participation in this global discussion in Kashmir. So there needs to be a way, and I think there are many discussions and many ideas on that. I think the government of Pakistan is considering appointing an international envoy, just like an envoy on Afghanistan, for example, or the UN envoys on Iraq. I think there needs to be an envoy for Kashmir, and I think there's a discussion on that in Pakistan, and I think there's been some discussion on that at the United Nations at the level of the Office of the UN Secretary General. But those are discussions that are still underway. So an envoy for Kashmir maybe could be a one way forward. Another would be for Kashmiris themselves to really organize themselves along the lines the Palestinians did back in the 1970s. It's been almost half a century. I think that those lessons are available, how the Palestinians were able to get a seat at the table, how they organized themselves, how they got into discussions with and negotiations with Israel, with the United States, with the European Union, with the international community. So that's one way for the Kashmiris to move forward. Another would be for the other party to the conflict, which is the government of Pakistan, to amplify or sort of amplify its diplomacy and its role, and sort of exploit this shift and change in the international environment and perceptions on India and Kashmir. And the government of Pakistan, of course, is also struggling. It has I mean, it's been struggling, of course, with this conflict for half a century, for more than half, for 70 years now, and it is adjusting to the new realities of the region, with the new escalation inside Indian-occupied Kashmir, and of course, with the tensions between China and India. All of these things need to be factored by a country like Pakistan, which also has I think these are the 2 or 3 points that I wanted to put forward here at this forum, and I thank the chair again for giving me a chance. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Qureshi, for your contribution. It was good to know that international media has given a lot of attention to the Kashmirian perspectives are changing the worldwide. But looking at the things what India is doing in Kashmir is that since August 5th, we can see when the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A was done, and the special status was taken away, and 8 million people were caged at that time. But on September, we can see government issues orders to coal miners in Jammu and Kashmir, and first time outsiders were invited to participate. And in December 12, 2019, 5,700,000 acres of land was identified for setting up industrial estates, which is also a colonial settlement program. And then new domicile law on the March 31st was introduced. And May 8, you can see that domicile status becomes eligibility conditional for admission to educational institutions. So the Kashmiris are deprived of the education and jobs over there. And process was made so easy for the settlers to get the domicile that till date, 1/4 of the population of Indian-occupied Kashmir is already the settlers. And likewise, the forest land, which was owned by the forest, now it has become the land for the government to allocate this land to the military and other establishments. And although there was a cover, the people of Kashmir were under lockdown, but the foreigners, the Indians, were allowed to inflict into Kashmir. They were taken to the Kashmir, and with the infections of the COVID-19, and so on and so forth. The language of the Kashmiris, that has been snatched also, this cultural aggression on this front. I can count on and on, but there's a lot of things which India has done so far to execute its policy of annexation and the demographic change. We have been joined by Maulana Abbas, Masroor Abbas Ansari. I think he was with us shortly. I'm thankful to him, but he has joined us despite the internet shutdowns in Kashmir, the 2G. He might be facing a lot of problem, and he will be the first Kashmiri leader from the Indian-occupied Kashmir to speak in a webinar like this, because from 5th August onwards, no Kashmiri could speak. Who dares to speak? He finds himself in the prison. He finds himself in the trouble somewhere booked under UAE. I'd like to give floor to Mr. Saeed Faiz Naqshbandi, who's convening all party of this conference, also a law expert. Saeed Faiz Naqshbandi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani, for organizing this important. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you are
Hello.
audible to us.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay. And I'm thankful for giving me a chance to express my views on the subject. First of all, let me apprise the audience that Kashmir issue has three most important dimensions. Number one, it's a political issue, political in the sense that the United Nations has passed the resolutions on Kashmir dispute, giving the right to self-determination to the people of the state of the Jammu and Kashmir to express their for final disposition of the Jammu and Kashmir. Second, it is a human rights violations that take place. And thirdly, 900,000 Indian troops are stationed in Kashmir, and in consequences, India has become a threat to the regional peace and the characterized zone in the world, and strangulation. Let me now explain the human rights violations. India has taken multi-dimensional strategy to crash convention. Article 49, para 6 expressly prohibits any change, any transfer of the land under the occupation by the occupying forces. And if any state makes the demographic changes, it comes within the purview of war crimes. Since India has made now the demographic changes in the UN recognized disputed territory, these acts amounts to war crimes under Article 146 and 147 of the 4th Geneva Convention. It is a serious human rights violations. Fake encounters and forced disappearances is the order of the day. 900,000 troops, Indian troops, have been stationed in the small area in Kashmir. And it has become the most militarized zone in the world. This is a threat to the regional peace and security. It is a threat to the climate. And the international community is under obligation to take action under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. Our resolutions, the resolutions on the Jammu and Kashmir has been passed under Chapter 6. It is the pacific settlement of disputes. And for the implementation of the UN resolutions, there is expressly Chapter 7 enforcement measures, and international community, especially the UN Security Council, must take the action under Chapter 7 to implement the UN resolutions so that peace in the region, we could see the peace in this region. In 2018, the High Commissioner on Human Rights, OHCHR, has issued a detailed report on Kashmir. The report mentions various aspects and the violations, the human rights violations that are taking place in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And again, in 2019, the OHCHR has issued another report. And now on 14th of September, the High Commissioner for Human Rights at Geneva has again asked to stop the human rights violations and expressed the violations. Before these reports, 4 times the High Commissioner for Human Rights has asked India to allow the UN team to the Indian occupied Kashmir to assess the human rights violations. But India has not granted the permission. Why? The simple question that India doesn't want the world to know the human rights violations. And a simple question, what is the demand of the people? Jammu and Kashmir wants the implementation of, so that they could also see peace in this region. Therefore, we as an NGO, the peace-loving countries of the world are under obligation in the name of the humanity to send their teams to the Indian occupied Kashmir to assess the human rights situation there and support the implementation of the UN resolutions so that the human rights violation that is taking place in Indian occupied Kashmir, it may come to an end. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nakshbandi, for your contribution. We have been joined by Maulana Masroor Abbas Ansari. Masroor Saab, do you hear me? Hello? Masroor Saab?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Masroor Saab is, as I already introduced him, he is the executive member of All Parties Hurriyat Conference, and also he is the chairman of Ittihad al-Muslimin. Masroor Saab was also incarcerated many times, and also after August 5th, he will be the first leader from the Indian occupied Kashmir to speak to the international audience. We welcome him and we salute his bravery, because it's not easy to take the floor from there. And due to the slow internet connectivity, he, despite all, has made it. Masroor Abbas Ansari Sahab, you have the floor. We want to hear from you. What is the situation in Kashmir right now? What you face from the 5th of August and what's going on? Masroor Abbas Ansari Sahab, you have the floor.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
I don't know. Network will help and it will work because of the digital seats of Kashmir. So just I'm starting. First of all, I would like to thank KIIR and WNC for organizing this webinar on this important issue, and also for giving me a chance here to speak on the issue. Last year on August 5th, the day the Indian government revoked Kashmir's special status by abrogating the Article 370 and 35A, diluting whatever limited autonomy still existed on paper. Not to mention that India's military presence had already gave them a lot of control. Although Article 370 and its revocation was not our agenda at HPHC, as we consider Kashmir a disputed territory and we demand a peaceful resolution of the dispute in accordance with the free will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The revocation was yet another step towards completely annexing Kashmir. A move used to garner support in India at the expense of Kashmiri. The consent of the governor, which is essential in the democracy, is not at all a concern for the Hindu nationalist government of India when it comes to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which includes the Kashmir Valley. When India revoked the semi-autonomous status of the region, it also scrapped the local special citizenship law guaranteed under Article 35A of the Indian Constitution and decided to grant the citizenship to the non-locals. The move has drawn parallel with the occupied West Bank. The decision to provide non-Kashmiris residents with that domicile certificate is certainly the beginning of the end. We see this as that. This is the beginning of Kashmir becoming another Palestine. It is sad, it is horrible. I fear that time will come that we will not even feel safe in our homes. We have been silenced once again. The story of historical injustice in Kashmir is a never-ending saga. In the year 1947, there was massacre in Jammu, and more than 200,000 Muslims were systematically carried out to change the demography in the region of Jammu as the Maharaja preferred to remain independent of the new domain. After the horrific months, the demography of Jammu was completely changed. Muslims were in majority there. Muslims who constituted more than 60% of the population of Jammu region were reduced to a minority. The violence in Jammu region became one of the major reasons of conflicts in Kashmir. The valley that had remained peaceful during the time of partition, an effort to change the demography of the region by the Maharaja Hari Singh ignited violence that became perpetual source of conflict in the region, even when the documents related to the Jammu massacre were mostly destroyed by the then Dogra monarch. When seen together, another question arises from the history of the land conflict in the region of Jammu and Kashmir and the new domicile law. Whether the provision for the mostly Hindu West Pakistani refugees in the new domicile law is indeed a humanitarian gesture or another partial step to appease a specific section of religion or community. All told, since 1990, more than 70,000 people have been killed, at least 8,000 have disappeared, hundreds have been tortured, and thousands detained by Indian authorities. Promises of referendum allowing Kashmiris to decide the territory's fate made by then Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru in 1947 have been buried and replaced by a new narrative that Kashmir is an integral part of India. With every passing day, India's stand on Kashmir has grown more rigid, and violence against people of Jammu and Kashmir has become a norm. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi of BJP came into power in 2014, the policies of aggression became even more cruel. The only difference was that the deceptive sophistication of the secular Congress government was replaced by the brazenness of the Hindu majority and BJP. The international community has expressed but mild concern about the recent situation in Jammu and Kashmir, likely out of desire to retain trade and strategic relations with India. But our international agreements merely words intended to make the leaders who sign them feel normally just. The unilateral and undemocratic changes governing Jammu and Kashmir, unabated human rights violations, denial of basic facilities, and land grabbing due to militarization are all in violation of international law, UN resolutions, India's own constitutional framework, and India's commitments to Kashmir. India can only feel encouraged to continue its violent policy because of the lack of international moral leadership. The move of Indian government is disastrous for the whole region. Kashmiris feel that the revocation of special citizenship rights was aimed at reversing the Muslim majority character of the region, which is now directly ruled from New Delhi. The people of Jammu and Kashmir have opposed the change because we could see the nefarious designs behind the change. The people of Jammu and Kashmir on both sides of Pir Panjal mountains will be the sufferers of these domicile rules. India's latest step was the vindication of the country's consistent stance that the major intention behind the Indian government's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August was to change the demographic structure of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and turn Kashmir into a minority in their and turn Kashmiris into the minority in their own land. And all this has been part of the RSS BJP's Hindutva agenda. Now coming to the new domicile law introduced by the Indian government in Kashmir, which is the main concern of Kashmir. The certificate issued under the domicile law is a sort of citizenship and entitles a person to residency and government jobs in the region, which will be their right for the citizen. There is so many things that say that is something is fishy in this Indian government's stand. It appears that many people applied and certificates were also issued within a week's time to the applicant. Up to 25,000 people have been granted domicile certificates in Indian administrative Kashmir since May 18. It has raised fears of beginning of demographic change in the Muslim majority region of Kashmir. At present, there are over 7 lakh migrant laborers residing in Kashmir. They are giving domicile certificates to them also. The local government, which takes orders from New Delhi, has threatened to penalize officials of the domicile certificate if the domicile certificate is not issued within the stipulated 14 days, adding that it would be difficult to verify the claims of applicants within such short period. Kashmir was under a lockdown long before COVID-19. For weeks last year, all phone lines and internet services were cut off by the Indian government. Basic mobile phone connectivity took months to be restored, and a ban on high-speed 4G internet continues till this day. Still, Indian government has made full use of coronavirus lockdown by passing the domicile rule, which has caused alarm because of its potential to change the demography of the major grants the rights to the residency and government jobs to anyone from India who has lived in the state for 15 years or more. The process of bringing the new domicile policy has been shrouded in secrecy without involving consultations with relevant stockholders. There is angst among the critics and residents who have compared the new domicile law with settlements in the Israeli occupied West Bank. If you compare the domicile law introduced in Kashmir with the northern state of Assam, you can see the difference. In Assam, the ruling BJP government wants every application to be scrutinized by officers, but this is not possible. This is not happening in Kashmir. In Assam, people also have the right to object to anyone's application. But here in Kashmir, neither officers nor anyone else has the right to object to domicile right. The government has already warned those who oppose that they will have to go to jail. People were not in support of the law, but cannot oppose because of the pressure of gun and state violence. These actions of India will only complicate conflict and make things ugly. Your topic, demographic change in Kashmir or the violation of international law, and has raised many new fears. First, the new domicile law is turning out to be another reason for conflict in the region. The fresh law denies the historical significance of people's efforts for rights, recognition, and justice, and could possibly end up alienating the residents further. Second, the fresh law manifolds the fears of people of Jammu and Kashmir. They are already very small in number. It provides ample scope to outsiders in terms of resources and jobs in the region. The new domicile law is another project aimed at creating homogeneity in the region, turning its residents, primary Muslims, into a minority It will further deepen the conflict with demographic flooding of people based on scant documentary proof. Kashmiris fear that there is a total wipe out of Muslims from government in Jammu and Kashmir. Not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but the nationalist Hindu BJP aims to implement it in whole India. And so the people in Kashmir are very much fearing that this domicile law and these new intentions of Indian government will change the demography of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you, Maulana Masoor Abbas Zari Saab. It was a wonderful and brave intervention from your side, being in Indian occupied Kashmir, and we know what will be the consequences of this intervention. That's very much on. And as you rightly said, that this domicile law is to change the demographic and make people jobless, homeless in Kashmir. And those people are being given the domiciles who have been their fathers have been there utilizing Kashmiris for the decades. With this, I thank you. And I will now give floor to Sarah Owen, MP. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today. It's been really great to hear the contributions so far, and I'm really looking forward to hearing other panelists and their contributions. So thank you for putting on this event. Firstly, from Luton North, please let me express my community's wholehearted solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. What happens in Kashmir is felt across the world, but especially in communities like Luton, and as Paul had said previously, in Peterborough as well. Where we see our friends and family suffer, we all suffer. And looking at today's topic around specifically demographic changes, the new adaptation of state laws, the Jammu and Kashmir reorganisation, but specifically Order 2020, which was brought in March, and the domicile laws, it's defined who can own land and apply for government jobs in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, it's specifically this change in legislation that's important because it was brought in with little to no debate, no political scrutiny, or really even national media scrutiny. And when we see why that was, many senior political leaders are either in house arrest or in jails. Everyone internationally, and understandably, is focused on battling the virus at the moment, COVID-19. But we also saw the culmination of two changes in law. So we had this change in domicile laws and laws that affected Jammu and Kashmir, but we also had a change in India on the new media policies, which threatened to incarcerate journalists for publishing what was deemed as anti-national material. So you had two big changes in legislation happening at exactly the same time, which brought about this lack of scrutiny and worryingly a silencing of mainstream media. And that is something that we are seeing across the globe as populations are focused on COVID-19. We are seeing certain states look to curb their levels of free media. And coupled with this is also a use of social media. So WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, to spread messages of hatred, messages of racism, conspiracy theories, and Islamophobia. And what we're seeing there is a silencing of mainstream media, but a use of social media in particular to spread hatred. And that is a very, very dangerous combination, especially when it comes to any lack of scrutiny of a state's behaviour and laws. And this case in particular, with a change in law that could have huge implications in the demographic makeup of Jammu and Kashmir, the clue, I mean, could be seen in very much in the new legislation's title. It's even called the reorganisation. It's not subtle necessarily in its aim. According to the 2011 census data, there's 1.5 million non-Kashmiris are now eligible under the 15-year category. And although that doesn't sound like a lot, actually that translates to about 13 to 14% of the total population of Kashmir, and that is a huge demographic change. And as we have spoken, and I have heard many times on international conferences, but also speaking with members of my community, this is just about basic human rights and our willingness and our commitment to uphold international law. This will take international attention, which I don't think we've had so far. And I'm pleased to hear from other panelists, Qureshi in particular, talk about Japan's media being focused now on Kashmir and the human rights abuses that have taken place there. But it needs to be much wider, much louder. And I'm also heartened when I hear Paul talk about this not being necessarily a party political issue for us in the UK as well, because the Parliament as well. And it's absolutely because we all have a job. People who care about human rights, people who have Kashmiri friends and family in their constituency and where they live, but also wider than that. This is about international standing and saying we are going to be committed to not just human rights, but upholding international law as well. That is going to take cross-party, but also cross-border support and attention. And while many people are rightly concentrated on the pandemic, we as parliamentarians must not and will not take our eyes off the rights of the people of Kashmir. We must not only stand in solidarity, but also use our voices to ensure international law is upheld, that human rights are protected, and that Kashmiri's determination for their future is supported to make sure that it's a bright one as well. So I thank you very much for inviting me on this panel. I've heard great contributions so far, and I look forward to hear others. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for your contribution and your support for the people of Kashmir and the way you expressed your views on this. And I'm sure that your voice will count and you can make inroads in the parliament and also in the society in the UK and other communities around, so that we can galvanize more and more support for the oppressed people of Kashmir, for the voiceless people of Kashmir, so that they can be heard a while. So I now give the floor to Shaista Safi, a young lobbyist and activist from Kashmir, recently moved to UK, had experiences in UK activism and her views on Kashmir. Ms. Shaista Safi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vani Sahab, for giving me the floor, and I'd like to appreciate and thank all the panelists, especially Sarah Owen, for her solidarity with the people of Kashmir and her kind words. If I speak that if international laws are and were applied impartially in Kashmir, an international war crimes tribunal would have been established years ago to try the scores of Indian civilian and military leaders guilty of crimes against humanity and aggression. What Slobodan Milosevic did in Kosovo and Bosnia pales in comparison to what Indian civilian and military VIPs have done in Kashmir for 73 consecutive or successive years, something resembling genocide on installment plan. And engineering a democratic and demographic change is and will not be hard for Indian government, as Modi seems to be borrowing a page from Israeli book. In November 2019, Sandeep Chakrabarty, India's Consul General in New York, called for the adoption of the Israeli model in Jammu and Kashmir. And I quote him that he said, if the Israeli people can do it, we can also do it. So when I said engineering a demographic change is and will not be hard for the Indian government, the reason is the Article 49 of 4th Geneva Convention that states the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into territory it occupies. When it's a law, means India has to show the power to break it. India has time and again violated almost each and every article, be it in Geneva Convention or even the Bible of Human Rights, that's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Indian occupied Kashmir, from Article 1 of every person is born free, to Article 30 that each and every human rights is applicable to everyone, and all the articles in between have been violated by Indian occupational forces on daily basis. And even if we leave all these articles aside and just talk about the non-derogable rights or the absolute rights, a term mentioned in Universal Declaration that refers to the primary rights that can never be even violated, even in the condition of emergency. And the first right is, the first article is right to life. And we nowadays are witnessing every day a Kashmiri is being killed, lockdowns, raids, blanket ban on communication, a closing down of educational institutions, offices in everyday life, destruction of economy, destruction of property and businesses. This is the story of Kashmir, and it's not just from the August 5th, 2019, but it is since the occupation has started. And atrocities such as shooting the unarmed crowds at demonstrations and firing upon funeral processions, these occur regularly now. So what we see nowadays in Kashmir, along the state-sponsored terrorism by India, Kashmir is witnessing constitutional terrorism as well. And by unilaterally abrogating the articles, India has violated their own constitution, which clearly stated that no change can be made to Kashmir without consultation and approval from the Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly. India have broken their own promises, past promises of holding a plebiscite in Kashmir, and have been changing the nature of Kashmir for years. Abrogating Article 370 and 35 in a way they have reflects the blatant disregard India has for the UN resolutions and international law, but also demonstrates the openly sinister politics of Narendra Modi, BJP, and the RSS. Just a few weeks ago, a report was published that India have already issued 400,000 domicile certificates to non-Kashmiris, so they may permanently reside in Kashmir. The demographic change, the ethnic cleansing, and settler colonial project is in full swing, so much so that it took Israel 50 years to do what India have done just in less than a month. According to March 2020 rule, anyone who has lived in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years or studied there for 7 years or written class exams of 10th class or 12th class board examination in a school there are eligible for permanent residency. The first person to acquire domicile certificate was a senior Indian diplomat from the eastern Indian state of Bihar, who was posted in Jammu and Kashmir. And the children of Indian government officials, all Indian service officers, other public sector employees, and even the researchers who have spent time, more than 10 years in Jammu and Kashmir, are eligible to apply for domicile. For non-Kashmiris, it has been made so easy that to get the domicile certificate that they just need a ration card or just a document of proof of residency, and they can even apply electronically and they will receive it electronically as well. But for the people of Kashmir, for the natives, they have to give so many documents. They have to issue a certificate first from the district office. Then to get a permanent residency certificate, one needs to submit an affidavit first, and then a host of documents, and which would take months to prepare. That means the natives of the land are alienated, whereas the aliens are treated as first-class citizens. India have used varied tactics on Kashmiris to force, coerce, and intimidate people to accept slavery. And on 5th of August 2019, India used a bulldozer to try and crush Kashmir once and for all. It's now plain and very obvious that people do not matter to India, the territory matters. and for their settler colonial project to force demographic change, maybe for military or strategic positioning, maybe for many types of minerals and resources Kashmir has, or maybe for the hydroelectric potential. But there are other reasons that BJP spokespersons or parliamentarians regularly narrate, and one of them was a publicly stated by CM of Haryana, and I quote him that some people are saying Kashmir is open now and brides will be brought from there. And one more BJP member of Legislative Assembly says party workers in other provinces should rejoice. They can easily marry white-skinned women of Kashmir now. So, and there are reports that how to marry a Kashmiri woman was progressively Googled after August 5th. This is the reason people of India and especially BJP are giving why they admire Kashmir. And we need to understand this. This all is happening after the abrogation of Article 370. And we remember how Kashmir and how Kashmiri women were treated before this article, so-called special status. More than 10,000 Kashmiri women have been raped. We remember that. Kashmir has been used as a testing ground by India for decades, and that laboratory experiment has now expanded as a policy in India for minorities, especially for the Muslims. And it is important to mention that the foundation laying of Ram Mandir happened on 5th August 2020, exactly a year after India illegally annexed occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The symbolism is apparent, and it was purposefully done, and it is not just a coincidence. First, they abolished the Kashmiri identity, and then they laid the foundation of Hindu identity after destroying a mosque, a masjid, a Muslim identity. So they are destroying the identity of Kashmiris and their religious identity as well. So we have been, the activists on Kashmir, we have been regularly exposing the sinister plans, and not only the plans, but the actions of Indian state as well. It is the responsibility of those who can and must do, instead of just wait, watch, condemn and apologize later. We need these people in the power corridor to move now, and just with not the words, but we need their actions as well. At the last, I'll just remind people and the audience here that genocide alert has been issued for Kashmir just after the 5 or 10 days of this abrogation of Article 370 and 35 in 2019. Genocide alert is already there for Kashmir. What are we all waiting for? I thank you all, and I leave this all with all of you with this question: that what are we all waiting for now?
Thank you, Shaista, for your detailed intervention, and really not only alert genocide, but a slow motion genocide is already taking place in occupied Kashmir, as you rightly pointed out to the statements of the BJP leaders, the RSS leaders, and the symbolism that took place on August 5th this year, laying the foundation stone of Ram Mandir and all that. And so on and so forth, what you discussed is all on records and people are very much aware of it. But unfortunately, what we have seen so far is that world powers are largely silent. They are just looking for their economic and strategical interests rather than the human rights or the rights promised to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. But people of Kashmir, despite all the odds, they have outlived all these circumstances in past, and they are very much firm that they will outlive the Indian designs in years to come. I have a question from my audience. What may be the future of your resolutions related to the plebiscite after the ongoing demographic change? If any of the panelists will respond to this question. Sayyid Faiz Naqshbandi, you there? Hello, Ahmed?
Well, of course, nobody can, Mr. Wani, look into the future, but obviously, if the facts on the ground dictate or take precedence over any resolutions anywhere. So the sad reality is, if India succeeds in effecting this demographic change, and I think, and despite talking about this, I would just caution against going ahead of ourselves, because although India's plan is very clear, it's about demographic change in Indian occupied Kashmir. It's easier said than done. It's one thing to issue demographic or domicile certificates, which is something that Indian government can do because they have the authority. They can issue papers and they can run a media campaign showing that they're issuing domicile certificates. But it's a totally another thing to actually shift populations in a short time and avoid friction. So it's easier said than done, but it can be done over a longer period of time. And when we see longer, 5, 10, or 15 years, slowly and gradually issue these domicile certificates. But how many Indians would actually move into Kashmir and risk really living in an area which is unstable and is racked by resistance and violence and unacceptance? And also, when we compare with the Israeli occupied territories in the West Bank, I think it's important to remember that one of the reasons why the Israeli governments were successful in moving some of the settlers to those areas was because of a strong religious compulsion that pushed many of the religious-minded people, and many of these settlers, of course, in the West Bank are religious-minded Jewish settlers. There was a compulsion, there was a reason, there was a motivation. In Indian occupied Kashmir, not many, and in India, mainland India, not many Indians really have that religiously driven motivation to move into Kashmir yet. So while the Indian government is running this media campaign, trying to encourage Indian citizens, showing them these domicile certificates and the number of certificates they're issuing, it's easier said than done, even for the Indian government to really shift large number of Indian citizens from mainland India into Kashmir. This is yet to be seen, and most Indians know that it will not be easy for them to be accepted if they move into Kashmir. But returning to your point, Mr. Wani, and I conclude here, if India succeeds, if India does it, and if India succeeds in moving people, yes, there will be a threat, that a question mark on the possibility of implementing these resolutions as the time comes. But legally, of course, the resolutions remain, and they're binding. So it's a race of time. Can the Indian government really succeed in affecting demographic change in Kashmir in a short period of time in order to overturn the plebiscite resolution? That's the question.
Said Faz,
Yes.
your views on.
Thank you, Mr. Qureshi. Let me clear that 25 lakhs people have applied for domicile from only Bihar, and it has been acknowledged by the minister, interior minister in the Lok Sabha. 16.79 million domicile certificates have been issued. And the demographic steps it has been taken for demographic changes. Now the demographic changes have taken place. It is a planned way to defeat the UN resolutions. You see, these steps, these are definitely war crimes. You are changing the overwhelming Muslim majority area into a minority by doing these changes. You see the Government of India planning fast-tracked online issuance of domicile certificates. This has been all ordered to issue the certificates within 24 hours. Now the powers was with the Tahsildar. Now it has been delegated to the Naib Tahsildar and has been asked to deliver the domicile at the doorstep. Now the changes, now the laws have been all changed, amended by the Government of India. Now any area that can be declared strategic and handed over to the India. And they are planning to open and establish these settlements just on the pattern of the Israeli settlements in the Gaza. This is the same roadmap. Now you see, I was talking about the economic strangulation. Our fruit industry destroyed in a planned way by the Government of India. Our tourism, our handicrafts, our fruit industry, these were three main sources of economy to the people of the Indian occupied Kashmir. Dashed to ground. And the curfew is being ordered, it is being enforced at the time when the fruits are ready for the market. Since the fruits is a perishable item. Likewise, you see the human rights violations. Laws have been framed that facilitates the human rights violations. There is an impunity granted to the Indian soldier. And how many Indian soldiers have been tried? Now, nobody. This is in a planned way. Now you see the freedom of expression. Now the Government of India has given a new media policy. It is the Government of India that can decide whether any content is against the government, and if it is like that, it can result in the closure of the media house as well as the penal action against the journalist. That means no freedom of expression. Once you snatch the freedom of expression, there remains nothing. And so far as the freedom of free assembly is concerned, nobody can move out on the street to express his views. He can be taken away by the Indian Army. This is the situation. This is the situation where millions of people are living. And you see the pandemic of COVID-19, when every country was fighting against this pandemic, India was taking benefit out of this pandemic. And during these pandemics, the fake encounters have been staged. The houses, the devilings, along with the devilers, they have been destroyed. All this. And now you see the most heinous crime. It is the demographic changes, the today's topic. India is taking the people, the Indian people from the mainland India and going to settle down in Indian occupied Kashmir, giving them the domicile certificates. It is inhuman. But the responsibility lies on the international community. Responsibility lies on the United Nations, because the Kashmir is a UN recognized disputed territory, and the Kashmir dispute still figures on the agenda of the UN Security Council. There are laws in the UN Charter, enforcement measures I was talking earlier. There is a law, but who will do it? The responsibility lies on the United Nations, on the peace-loving people of the world, the peace-loving nations of the world, they must implement their resolutions that has been passed and agreed upon by India also. Thank you.
Thank you, Seshwar. Yeah, Shaista.
The points here were raised that, as Ahmed said, that is why Israel was successful in doing what it did, because of the religious factors. Many of the Jews had those religious affiliations with Palestine, and but the fact is, most of the Indians have religious affinity and affection with Kashmir because of the Amarnath shrine, and we saw in 2008 and 2010 when this Amarnath shrine board and that land was given to India, Indians, Hindus, how Kashmiri reacted, and that question of Kashmiris. And then India worked on those factors. We saw after 2019 that how India is portraying Kashmir as a tourism spot and asking people to come and spend their vacations in Kashmir, being a tourism spot, because we know that there are certain parts of Kashmir that India has not touched as a military base, because just to show to the world that Kashmir is still a tourism spot. There was a news that 50,000 more mandirs will be built in Indian occupied Kashmir within a span of 1 year, so that people from India could come and pay their homage to their religious authorities. Secondly, what I said earlier, that women of Kashmir is being portrayed as something that is to look forward to. Indians are now asked to go to Kashmir, look for women of Kashmir and marry, because now there's no such bounding for them that they can't marry Kashmiri women. Bollywood is asked to make more and more movies in Indian occupied Kashmir, use the scenery, use the locations there, use even the public there, so that they can get involved in Bollywood more and more. And we already know that Biharis are already in Kashmir in a lot of numbers and doing odd jobs there, learning Kashmiri language there. We have been saying this for many years, that Biharis are doing all those odd jobs that Kashmiris feel that they are not able to do. So Biharis were there already. They are learning our language. They are learning our cuisine. They are learning our accent. And they are already there in a large number. And there were reports that during this COVID-19, when all the flights were cancelled, but there were special flights when these people were transferred to Kashmir by planes and even by buses. And lastly, that why Indians will come to Kashmir when there is a security threat, because they are given this guarantee that they will be given foolproof security, and there will be like Israeli style separate colonies for them that will be separated from Kashmiris by a wall. Like that, we will not be, Kashmiris will not be allowed to go there, but Indians, those settler colonials, will be there, and they will be enjoying our land, and we will be the one showing the identity cards, and we'll be the one who have to show their identity pass to cross those roads. So plan is already there. It is on the ground. Kashmiris are looking into it. We understand that we have been exposing these things, but to the deaf ears, I guess. But now we can see all the picture very clearly that all these things are happening, and it's not just a factor of that these things will be happening in 5 or 10 or 15 years. This is happening even today.
Thank you, Shaista. Sarah, would you like to add something?
Hello. Sorry. Yes, just quickly, I just wanted to say that absolutely right. And I think that I wanted to back up my sister, Shaista, on the negative impact that this has had on women in particular. And that my concern is that, as with all human rights abuses, it is women that suffer many times in many different ways. And I think that this takes now an international voice to highlight not just the human rights abuses, but the gender rights abuses that are taking place in Kashmir. And I wholeheartedly concur with everything that everybody else had said, coming last to the end of the question. But I just really wanted to reiterate what Shaista said and the importance of it, and the importance that we do continue to have Kashmiri women speaking out at every opportunity, and for us to amplify their voices, their experiences, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with them as well.
Thank you, Sahar, for your response. This comes to the end of today's webinar as we discussed about the domicile law, its impacts on Kashmir in length. And also, we also said that it is against the Geneva Conventions and also against the UN resolutions on Kashmir. When this question was posed that what may be the future of the UN resolution on Kashmir, I was wondering that there is a resolution also in United Nations Commission on India and Pakistan, 5th of January 1949. In its clause 6 and 7, it's clearly stated that there can be no material change on the ground, and the people who have already resided in Kashmir, they have the right to return and vote, but nobody else can position on Kashmir. But when we come on the practical question, practical is this, that India is very much on it to settle a project in Kashmir. They have the domicile law and very fast track system of issuing the domiciles. And as Shaista said, the Indians have also the religious affirmative with Kashmir, as did the Israelis have in the Palestine. Not only the Amarnath Shrine is the one, but they have in past years, we call it the militarized pilgrimage. What they did in the past years, they also found some more places to name them as the religious sites and to invite the more and more Hindus to visit those sites and to pay homage to them. So that is the way the Indians are doing it on, as you said, it is difficult, as Ahmed said, it is difficult to say than to do. But what we see, they have, in the first instance, they have issued the domiciles mostly in the Jammu region, where they feel that they cannot be, have much problem. So that is the one of the areas, and by this way they will change the demography of Jammu, and thereby having a Hindu chief minister of the state, and have the, then they will move into the Kashmir Valley. And when we say they will change, but they have already changed. As in my intro, I said that 1/4 of the population of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is already now the settlers. Those who have been issued the domicile certificates, as on the 5th of August, when this law was enacted in Kashmir, when the application was done, and on the 31st of March, when this new domicile law, at that point of time, 20.1 billion Indians were entitled in that parameters to secure the domiciles in Indian occupied Kashmir. This is a way to defeat, on one hand, the UN resolution on Kashmir, to defeat the plebiscite on Kashmir. On the other hand, I see it as to create a criminal rift in Kashmir, as already they demonized the Kashmiri movement, giving it a name that is a Muslim movement against the Hindus, which is what not. It was for the rights of the people of Kashmir. But by bringing more Hindus and bringing them in front of Muslims and creating the criminal rifts in Kashmir, which never have happened before, though the government of India tried to all this. So all of this is there, but as you said, that international community is silent, and we all know that there is a legal system available, but the international laws and anywhere laws are made for the state to implement. The states implement these laws for their national security and for their own purposes. It is only written on the paper that all humans are free. They are born free. They have the right to freedom of expression. They have the right to freedom of opinion. But when it comes to states, and like the regimes in India, the fascist regimes, they don't give you the space to express your dissent. When you express your dissent, you found yourself in trouble, as is happening to the many Kashmiris who are social media activists, or political leaders, or otherwise the common people who once in a while try to sneak out and speak against this, but find themselves in trouble. With this, I hope, and we all hope and pray, that good sense will prevail around the globe, in the global makers and shakers of the policy at global level, they will look into the sensitivity of the matter and the way it is posing threat to this region's security, not on the regional security, but the security, international security and peace, as three nuclear powers are now becoming the active partners in this conflict. So I think global community will have to step in and resolve the Kashmir problem amicably and give the people of Kashmir their birthright, that's right, submission. I thank you all for your participation with this. I close this webinar.
Thank you, Anisal.
Thank you. Thank you, Farisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I leave.